Hi guys, so in today's tutorial I'm going to be looking at using Onshape, which I do regularly for 3D modeling, but I wanted to make this link to laser cutting and 2D modeling as well. This is a really important skill in terms of prototyping, I think, and when I was looking at the NEA from last year, one of them was working from home. I thought, well, there's loads of ways that we could use laser cutters to create storage and stuff like that. So but we want to model it and see it in 3D, and sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect. So this video today is very much about making a 3D box but using 2D to allow us to do laser cut objects. Okay, so first thing, if I just look at my Onshape, I've created it, I've gone into my education account, so you should hopefully in your education account be able to see the same thing. And then I'm going to go create document, and I've actually already created one and I've called it Laserbox. Okay, so I'm going to click and open Laserbox. Right, so I'm not going to do this as an introduction to Onshape. I'm going to go, this is quite basic, you'll be able to follow this along if you've used Onshape before. Just one thing that I want to point out that my students often get wrong is make sure your units of measurement are correct, and if you're not sure, you can click on those three little lines there and go to workspace units and make sure that you're working in millimeter. Anything else in there you might change later on, but actually for me that's the key bit, making sure that you're working in millimeters, and then green tick it. Right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at our work planes, and I'm going to actually do a box with a drawer and a lid is what I'm thinking today. Okay, so I'm going to choose my work plane for my starting point, which is going to be my base. So I'll go sketch, I'm going to use the top work plane, so I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to press N for normal, which means that I'm looking straight at it. Now I'm going to draw a rectangle, so because I'm in a sketch, my sketch tools become available. I'm going to choose a rectangle, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it out. Now again, what you can do, I can set my dimensions as I do it. So 200, press enter, then the next one 150 and press enter. Let's have a look at that. 200 by 150, it's alright. I'm actually going to reduce that down. I'm going to click on that. Oh, sorry. I've looked at that and I've thought, do you know what, I don't like that, that's already too big. So again, within the tools, I can click on it and make that one 150, press enter, and make that one 100 and press enter. So what I'm doing is I'm using the parametric tools here and the dimensioning tools to actually get my box size right. First of all, I'm going to work very small. I'm imagining this to be some sort of storage for like a USB devices or a few coins or something like that. So 150 wide by 100 tall, and then let's assume that I'm going to green tick that. Now what that's given me is a sketch on the left hand side in the model tree. Right, now normally I don't bother naming my sketches, I'm a little bit lazy like that. But today I'm going to do that. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to rename, and I'm going to call that base and press enter. So I've now got a sketch called base, and that's going to be important in terms of outputting for laser later on, but I'll explain that when we come to it. Now because I'm going to be imagining this to be 3mm MDF, which is a really good prototyping material for laser cutting, I'm going to use a tab building process. Okay, so I'm actually going to have slots and tabs that fit together as my process. Now if I want my interior of my box to be 200 by 150, what I actually need to do is to make my sides probably slightly larger than that. So I need to just double check what I'm doing and think about your measurements a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back into my base sketch, I'm going to go edit, I'm going to go N for normal, so I'm viewing straight on, and now I'm going to put some tabs into it. Now my preference today is going to be that I'm going to put tabs inside it. I'm going to draw it rather than talk about it. Okay, so I'm going to actually click and draw a line in and draw a line out. Okay, now there's a couple of ways of doing this. I was kind of mulling over the best way, but I'm going to do it this way. Okay, now if I cut in my 150 and then I put a wall thickness in there, it's going to get a little bit smaller. The dimensions of my objects are going to shrink. If I want the outside to be 150, then I need to inset it. So it takes a minute to think about that, but basically all of my slots are going to be 3mm. I'm going to choose to come inside for simplicity today. So I've drawn this rectangle, and I'm going to use my dimensioning tool to just come in and type 3. 3mm is the thickness of the material. Okay, you'll notice at the moment that I haven't put a dimension here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing. Click, make sure I'm running at 90 degrees down there. Right click to escape my line. Okay, so I'm using my right click mouse button. If I'm in the middle of using a tool, I can mouse click, right mouse click out of it. 3 and press enter. So I've now got 2 steps, if you like. Okay, now what I need to do is I need to make sure if I've got 100mm there, I'm going to divide that into, I think 3 is quite a good number for this to keep it simple. You might decide to do more little versions of it, but let's keep this as simple as possible for a minute. So 100 divided by 3 is going to be 33.333, but it hasn't actually got to be divided exactly into 3, providing I'm using a nice measurement. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to choose to dimension from that line there to that edge. Okay, and let's make that I don't know, let's make it 30 and press enter. Okay, I'm going to come down onto this one, dimensioning tool, click on that line, click on that line, and make that 30. Okay, so what I've got is a box with 2 slots which are 30 and 30. Now if I put another dimension on here, what you'll hopefully see, if I do it right, between that one and that one, is that we've got a whole number, no small points or anything, okay, and it's a grayed out one. That means that it's a driven dimension. So if I change the size of those slots, that will change automatically, but it will be driven by what's happening around it. Okay, so I've got that there. Now, a couple of ways I could do things. I could mirror that over on the right hand side, but for me, I think it's just as easy to do it this way. Now, what you might notice, if I come over to here, it hovers and it gives me a construction, kind of a constraint that's going to lock it into position with that one. Okay, I'm going to click and drag in. Look at me enter the data now. 3, enter, click up, and then right click to escape that line. So I actually constrained that line there to be in line with that one there. We'll do the same thing again. So go back to my line tool, tell the computer what I want to constrain against, click there, so it's locking off against that. Click there, type 3 to enter that number, and now come down. And then escape the line. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why aren't I spending time getting my lines not overlapping? And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to trim this box afterwards to create this shape that I want. So I wanted those dimensions, I wanted that 3mm thickness. The rest of it I'm going to do a little bit of trimming of in a minute using the scissor tool within this sketch. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a slot in the back and in the front to accept the front and the back. Okay, so now again I'm going to use my line tool. I'm going to click, drag down, press 3 and press enter. So that's now giving me a line at 3mm. I'm going to come across 42, let's make that a slot of 40, and then I'm going to come up here, if you look at what I'm doing, and click on that edge and escape the line. So a little reminder, if you're watching me kind of moving things around, middle mouse button down will scroll, will pan, middle mouse button rolling will zoom, and then right click will allow me to orbit my object. Alright, and if I get lost I can do one of two things. If I'm in a sketch I can press N, or I can click on, in this case, the top of my view cube twice, and that will recenter me. So I've now got this slots here, but that slot could be anywhere left and right, so I'm going to position it, but this time I'm going to position it relative to this edge here. Okay, so let's have a look at what we get. Click on that edge, click on that edge. That's giving me 51. I'm going to OK that for a minute. Click on that edge, click on that edge, and that's giving me 58. Okay, so again, that's a driven dimension. Let's make this 58. Okay, so 58 and 52. Right, let's make this 54. 54 and 56. Let's make that 55. Okay, 55 and 55. Now, you could calculate that. You could work that out using a calculator or using your head. Okay, relatively easy maths. But actually what I wanted to do was to just show you how you can find a dimension by using the dimension tools. The grey one is driven, the 40mm slot was fixed, and the 55 is the position from the left edge in. Okay, quite a lot of information there. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Now again, I could use mirroring tools and all sorts, but I'm going to use this align constraint. I'm coming up, click, press 3. Going to come across, look at this, I'm going to align against that one, click, and then I'm going to come down 3. And then right click to escape the line. Okay, so that's now giving me my my slot in the middle that lines up with this one. I'm going to show you hopefully in a minute how that's constrained. But let's now use the trim tool here. So using this trim tool, I'm going to trim out this corner to create that step. Same thing over here. Let's do the same on this side. Okay, so just looking at my lines, mouse buttons zooming around, zooming in. Now if you accidentally, just going to escape the trim for a second with the right mouse button. If you accidentally got rid of any extra lines or anything, that's not a problem. You just redraw them back in using the line tool. So if you accidentally do it, or the other option is to use the undo feature over here. A slot 40mm wide there, a tab 40mm wide there, that's coincidental. I've got a gap of 30 and 30, it's all constrained. Let's just change one of these for a second and hopefully you'll see something happen. So if I change that, you don't need to do this. Change that to 25 and press enter. You'll notice that that gap there and that gap there have remained at the same level. They're both at 25. This tab has become 45. Remember that was 40 a minute ago. So it's stretched to accommodate that size. Okay, let's turn that back to, let's make it 35. Okay, everything moves. So now that slot in the middle has had to shrink because it's a driven dimension. Okay, so that's worth just having a little bit of a look at. So this is now my base over there, and I'm going to tick it. I'm just going to turn off some of the visibility of these because that gets a bit confusing, doesn't it? All right, so that's the base drawn on the, if I right click and edit, that is drawn on the top plane, so that's facing up and down. Okay, and now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to turn that into a three-dimensional object. Okay, so we go extrude, and the computer says, what do you want me to extrude? You select this face, and you can pull it around if you're exploring a little bit, or I know that I'm working with 3mm material, so I press 3 on my keyboard and press enter and green tick it. Okay, so that's now my base part. Now I'm going to use that hopefully as a top and a bottom, but what we'll start by doing is just using it as the base. So that's that part there. There's the sketch. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to do a sketch on the left hand or the right hand side. So I'm going to go sketch. Now sometimes we sketch on work planes, but now I've got an object, I'm actually going to do my sketch here. on that plane there, the plane of the object. Okay, and then press N for normal. I'm going to delete that and do that whole process again. So there's my object. I'm going to draw onto the side of it. I go sketch, zoom in, click on the side of it, press N for normal, and now I'm going to do my sketch here. So, line tool, I'm going to click at the bottom, I'm going to draw up to give me the height of my box. Let's put a number in there, let's make that 75. I'm going to come across, and I want to come across until I'm lined up with the opposite corner. And so Onshape's doing me the favour of giving me that constraint tool, and that makes it 100. And then I'm going to come down to the bottom corner here. Right, so I've kind of got a rectangle. I could join that up and then go through that process that we've just done. Or what I can do is I can come along and click, zoom in, click, 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 and click. Okay, so what I've done there, I bet you're really annoyed listening to me say click that many times. I'll try not to do that again. What I've done is I've come up from that edge, gone all the way across, gone down, and then I've followed the profile of this tab on the sketch. Then I've closed the sketch up. So if I just green tick that for a second, and you go to my extrude tool, and make sure I've got all of those bits selected. I'm not sure why it didn't select that then. And I need to make sure I'm going to new. Usually, quite often we'll do add. If I go new, it'll make it a new part. Now remember, we're working with 3mm MDF. So if you look at what I've got there, green tick it, that's my new part. That's worked out quite well, it's quite neat. Okay, now I know I'm going to end up having to do some other stuff in here as well, but that's not a problem for a minute. Remember, we're going to have a sketch which has got a name, and I didn't do that a minute ago. We've got a base sketch, our sketch that we've just used for our extrusion sitting over here in the model tree. If I wanted to edit that, if I go edit, I can come back into it and make changes, which I will do in a bit. But if I want to rename it, sketch 1, I'm going to right click and go to rename, and this is going to be called side. Press enter. Okay, so I've now got a base sketch and I've got a side sketch. Nothing's changed, they're just renamed. Right, now I'm going to do a back sketch, but what I'm thinking is before I do that, I'm going to actually need to put, if you look at the object, and again, this is your iteration, your prototyping, what you might want to do is screen grab at this point and go, okay, I've realized I need to put an extra slot in. So now I'm going to put a slot in the middle of this section here. All right, now what I might do is use the measure tool to work out what the middle of this section might be. Not from the very bottom, but maybe the middle of that section, just out of interest. Let's do it that way. And I can use my measure tool that hides down in that corner, and if I go to that point there and that point there, that's telling me that that distance is 72mm. Look at where I'm measuring from and measuring to. It gives me all sorts of other things as well, but that'll do me. So I now am going to create a slot inside one. If I go edit inside one, so overall it's 75, but we want this slot to, let's make that 30. So I've got a slot there, 3 and 30. And I didn't worry about the positioning of it yet, because I'm going to actually position it using my dimensioning tool from this bottom edge to there. Okay, so let's make that 25 for a minute. I quite often plonk a dimension down and see what I get. Okay, so we've got 25 and we've got 30. Okay, now remember, in order to get it in the middle, we need to find that sort of that comfortable spot, and it's only going to be 72 wide. 72 was the distance we had, sorry. Okay, so if we look 25 and 17, let's look at finding a number that works for this. Let's make that 20 and 22. We've got 30, so the obvious thing to do is to make that 21, isn't it? Okay, now you wouldn't, if you think about when you were drawing this, you wouldn't come up with 21 as a number, would you? And that's the great thing about exploring your designs in 3D CAD, is that it gives you a chance to have a bit of a look at things and work things out. Now I could have made that slot smaller, so for example I might have made that slot 25 to give me some bigger tabs. Doesn't really matter. Okay, the downside of this is that what's going to happen is that if that's 75, now what we're going to have is this slot is not going to be in the middle of 75, it's going to be in the middle of 72. Because that's that distance. For me, that's absolutely fine. But you might decide that you don't like that. That could be one of your design decisions. Okay, so I'm going to green tick that. Okay, now we've got that slot cut out. It's done that automatically because I'd already got an extrusion there. So it's updated my extrusion. But let's go back into that sketch again, because I've missed out a tab that I'm going to put on the front. So if I go into my side sketch, right click, edit, okay, N, view normal onto it. I need to put a tab on this side to make this a box. Okay, so I'm going to line it up with that, constrain it, click, 3, press enter. Did promise I wasn't going to say click every time I clicked, didn't I? I won't do that. Now let's get a dimension on this one and we'll see. Click on the line, click, press enter. Driven dimension. Hopefully you now know why it's a driven dimension. Go on, think about it. It's because I use the constraint tools from this object here, which means that whatever I do now, it's always going to line up. And then I'm going to use my scissor tool, which I didn't do on the last one, so it was interesting that it did that extrusion, I wasn't sure, and trim those 2 bits off. Okay, and then green tick it. And you can see now, fully extruded side piece. Now, if it didn't work out, if that extrusion didn't work out or whatever, what you could do, that extrusion there, extrudes 2, is linked to the side. I could delete that entire extrusion and go, hang on, that didn't work, why didn't it work? And then do a new extrusion. Okay, let's make sure we picked up that part there, which seems to be causing us a problem. If things go red, don't just ignore it. It's going to be some sort of hint that there's something wrong. And in this case, I've got, and I can see it there, in that sketch, a line that I haven't deleted. Now that's probably important. There's another issue there, hopefully you spotted. That's probably important to our laser cutting. So I'm just going to go N for normal, and this is the line here that seems to be throwing us up a problem. So I'm going to delete it, although I'm not sure that it's really showing up on that sketch, but I'm going to get rid anyway. If it doesn't go, then that's fine. Yeah, it's not giving me the option to delete it, so it's actually not appearing in that sketch. So I'm not sure why. So look, my extrude, it needs to be new, not add. New. And then green tick. So that's a new part. All right, now, so we've got a base, we've got a side. Right, so we're going to do the back shape now. Okay, and I'm going to do that, or the back or the front shape. I'm going to do that using this sketch here. So if I go sketch tool, I'm going to choose this interior face here. Press N for normal, so I'm viewing straight onto it. And now using my line tool, I'm going to start my sketch here. It seems to want to, so I'll go with that. Click there, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to follow the sketch profile of the objects that are kind of highlighted, and I'm going to just follow this contour. It's a bit like tracing really, and what it'll do is it will lock into position as I'm doing my drawing. And I'm going to just line up with that bottom edge there, hopefully. Don't think it's going to allow me to do it actually. Right, I'm going to just make up, what I've done is I've drawn a line. I haven't actually put a dimension on it because I want to find an alignment with this one here. Right, and if you look, I can't actually see that, so it's not giving me. I was hoping it would give me a kind of a highlighter. So I'm going to use my measure tool again. It's not very convenient. I'm going to measure from that corner there to that corner there. Sorry. It didn't do that then because I was locked on a line tool. So my measuring tab, from that corner there to that corner there, 144.14. I'm going to put 144 in this. So I'm going to just click on that line, dimension tool, and make that 144. Press enter. Now hopefully, all being well, that will actually line up with that mark there. Click. There we go. Okay. So what I drew, and this isn't actually correct, this sketch yet. Okay. So I started there. I've come down, across, up, across into that corner, followed that around, and that's what's missing is that profile tab on that side, and also this line here. So I'll just join that line up there for a second, and then I need to add in a kind of a sticking out tab. You might call that a tenon, I suppose. So with my line tool, I'm going to line up with that. Click, drag out, make that 3mm. Line up with that one. Okay, so I've got this tab sticking out here. I've now got one that corresponds with it that uses the same dimensions, and I can use my trim tool to get that profile right. I'm just going to stick on a dimension so that if I chose to change it later on, I know initially we've constrained it, but it'll allow me to see what I've got. Forget that the middle mouse button does that sometimes. Ooh, doesn't like that. What we've got there is probably a very small, yeah, so that's my misalignment, isn't it? Just deleted that part of the line. I'm sort of making the decision whether I leave this in the video or not, because I think it's quite important that you learn to troubleshoot. So what I've done, that line, when I was first drawing it, it was slightly wonky. It locked on quite nicely there, but it wasn't enjoying locking onto the bottom bit, right? And what it's done is this bit, when I zoom right in, you can see it's overlapped where I thought it was. I thought I'd got it right. So I've deleted this top line, and I've redrawn a nice vertical line, and now I'm going to use the trim tool there to delete the two overlaps, hopefully. Right, now. Yeah, so I've got my line there. So if I now dimension that, that was what revealed it to me. Yeah, I've got two driven dimensions, a 20, a 30, and a 21. Let's make that 21. Okay. So by going back, just doing that double check and putting those constraints on there, it showed me an error. It allowed me to fix it before I went too far. And because I'm in this CAD package, it allows me to make adaptations, and that's really important. Okay, now look, it's done something funny over here, isn't it? That's made that wonky. So again, I'm going to just delete the section that's causing me a problem. I'm going to put a dimension on here just to check that's coming out correctly, which it is. Okay, and now using my line tool, and now hopefully this driven dimension here will come out as 21. Yeah, so that corresponds, that makes sure that my tabs are in alignment correctly. Alright, and then I'm gonna green tick it, and finally extrude. Okay, we're gonna make sure it's a new part. We're gonna use 3mm, and then we green tick that there. Now, when I was doing my extrusion, I didn't select that tab bit at the bottom, so we'll come back into that extrusion, edit, and make sure we pick up that bit of the sketch that we did, and that's now included. Okay, so we've got extrude 3, sketch 1, side, base. So sketch 1 needs to be renamed. Edit. I'm just going to go back into sketch 1. Sorry, that's, I think what I've got is I haven't deleted that part of the line if it's in sketch 1. Okay, and there it is. And again, because remember we're working for laser cutting, you've got to have what I would know as a valid profile. It's got to be a decent profile, and where you've got overlapping bits that maybe shouldn't be there, they need to be fixed rather than ignored. Right, 36 minutes in, you're doing well. Now the last bit on this, so let's say we've got a side, a back, and a base. Now I need to make sure that that is renamed as back. Okay, so here's the slightly weird thing. If we're going to go and put this together as a box, we actually need to do that in the assembly. I've drawn them together, okay, but in the assembly we're going to just bring those parts in. So you've got a tab automatically created. I'm going to go insert. Now if I had an assembly put together already, I could bring an assembly in, but I'm actually going to bring in each of these parts individually so that you see it. You can bring the whole thing in, but I'm going to bring those parts individually. Click, that brings the base in. I'm going to right click and I'm going to fix it before I do anything else. And what that means is that it won't move. Then I'm going to bring in part 2. And I'm going to bring in another part 2. And then I'm going to bring in part 3. Right, I'm not going to bring in any more for a minute, so I green tick that. Now, the funny thing is about assemblies, they get a bit tricky, but if you hold your nerve, it will work out absolutely fine by doing the same thing. So remember, one of the first things I did, I right-clicked and I fixed the base. I could unfix it, but I want that to be the thing that everything else locks into position with. So now that I've got the base made, I'm going to use my planar mates to lock things into position. So let's do this face here first of all. Okay, so right mouse button allows me to scroll around. I'm going to use a planar mate. Plane is a surface, a flat surface, a plane. I'm going to click on that, and I want that to lock onto the top of this object. So I just hover around and it's now locked onto that. Okay, but it can still move. It won't move up and down, but it can move left and right. So the next thing I'll do is I'll choose, if I zoom in here, I'll choose that face there, and I'll lock that against that face there. And you might go, well, that's perfect, that looks alright, locks in nicely, but let's just zoom out and have a look at what happened. It can still move in that direction there. That's the only direction it can still move. So that tells me I need to go and lock that face there against that face there. And then solve it. You just saw one of the things that I really dislike about Onshape. Sometimes when it's doing mates, it kind of misaligns them as part of its preview. I don't like that, but you get used to it. So now that it's given me those three mates, I can solve it and green tick it. Okay, that's now locked into position. I can't move that, and I can't move the base because it's fixed. Everything else is movable. Right, so we'll do exactly the same thing, but we'll move the base in now, the back in now. So we go planar mate. Let's choose the bottom of that, and we'll lock that to the top of that. Okay, but remember, it can still move that way, and it can still move that way and that way. So let's choose now to lock it into the slots. Do it, that one there, and we want that to lock against that face there. Solve that. So you go, oh, that looks good. So let's just check it. It can still move in that direction there. So what we need to do is we need to lock that face against the inside of that slot. Green tick it. Solve, green tick. So we've now got an object which has got a back locked, a side locked. So literally the same thing again. And one of the things that people struggle with Onshape is that there's so much that you could do, but actually all you need to do is you need to do the same thing pretty much each time. Lock that to that. Look at what's moving. We'll lock that to that. Green tick that one, and then it looks like it's right, but obviously it can still move that way and that way. So we'll just zoom in and we will lock that one to that one. Okay, so there's my box. Now what it's missing now is the front. So we'll solve that. So I didn't bring in the back, so I'm reusing that component. But if I go insert, part 3, exactly the same as I've just done. If you find things are really, really out of whack when they come in, you can use this tool here. You double click on a part, and looking at those arrows, they'll give you a guide about how you can move it. So if you need to get it vaguely in position before you do your maneuvering, you can do. I would say that be a little bit careful about doing that, because it's very easy to think you've done a really good job of moving something and it looks right, but actually if you haven't constrained it in your object, in your assembly, then it's going to be wrong down the line. So don't use that and just go, if it looks right, it is alright, because it won't be. Right, so what I'm doing is I'm working my way around with the planar mate, just checking that things are locked in position correctly, looking for where I've got a range of movement. This I think is one of the bits that really takes a bit of getting used to. I think it's quite tricky. So Don't be afraid of, sometimes I'll delete a whole part and bring it back in and have another go at those mates, because they can be really, really tricky, particularly at Key Stage 4 if you haven't used it very much. So don't worry if you struggle with this a bit, but do practice it, because this will really make a difference to what you're doing. Okay, so there we go. And that's a box. All right, now what I would like to do, I'm conscious of time, that's 40 minutes, and I'm conscious that all we've made is a very simple box, and you might go, well, 2D design will do that better. But we've assembled it, we can check it, and we can keep iterating, we can keep going from design 1 to design 2 to design 3 and seeing how it looks in our virtual prototype. And remember, you screen grab this, you put it into your NEA folders, and yeah, okay, so it's taken us 40 minutes to draw a simple box. But let's go back to our part studio here. We've got base, side and back, and what I can do with that is open up 2D design, for example, and import my my DXF file. But I'm not going to go to do that. It's whatever you might use Lightburn or something like that in your area. But I can take each of my sketches, base, side and back, that I drew, and I can right click and I can export as a DXF. Worth noting here, part 1 is, let's rename the part 1. Let's call that base part. Right, your sketch is not the same as your part. That I can export. If you look at the options that I get, export as a DXF or a drawing. We're going to want DXF. If I go to my part, I got the option of export again, but this time it's a 3D format. And probably, I'm not suggesting this would be a good option for 3D printing, but probably going to be doing an STL. 3MFs are really good. I've spoken about those before. Okay, but certainly when you're exporting your 3D objects, you get a different option, but that comes from your parts. If I want to use these 3 things, base, side and back, as my laser cut parts, I can go export as DXF. I tend to get rid of the part studio nonsense that comes through with it. Base, but you might go box, base, and you might sometimes need to just check which version you're using. I don't mess with that, and I go export, and then that becomes a DXF file that I can bring into a laser cutter. I might put that into a second video at some point, but well done guys, well done for watching that. That's a lot in one hit, so good stuff.